folks, welcome back to another installment of Inspiral Gaming Weekly. As always, I'm your host Daniel, and I'm stuck here with Robert Hodge.
Hey there.
Last week, we whetted your appetite with some talk of gameplay, and this week we'd like to go back for seconds. So, we'll start with talking about some mechanics. In our last discussion on mechanics, you briefly mentioned that Dimension Door would be a turn-based game. So I was wondering, what are some of the basic actions that players can take on each of their turns?
So this game plays like a board game, so you have steps and phases. Players will start each of their turns with some form of an upkeep, which we call the choice step. Simply put, you either choose to rest for your turn or continue and make actions. If you choose to rest, you heal a little bit of health and sanity, and then it ends your turn and moves on to the next player. But if you chose otherwise, you have to choose what weapons, one or two weapons, you only have two hands of course, that you're holding in your hands, your equipment. Then it moves on to the main action step, where players have 2 action points to spend on anything. For example, you can perform simple actions like moving or attacking a monster or even another player within range. Or you can choose to perform more specialized actions, such as your character's special abilities, or activating a room event. Once you use your 2 action points, your turn's over and it moves on to the next player. You can choose to end your turn early if you want. Once each player has gone through their turns, then the mansion gets a turn. This is when the monsters move and attack and the mansion takes its own special actions. For example, in the base game, rooms are fairly unstable. After a certain number of rounds, rooms that exist in the mansion will start to violently dissipate into nothingness. And what I mean by exist in the mansion, it means a player or an effect causing room permanence is in that room. So players will know when a room is becoming unstable. It'll have an indicator of some sort, and they'll have 1 full round after that trigger to get the hell out.
Okay, so from what I gathered from what you said, there will not be characters with 3 arms.
No.
So I
no
can't be
guests.
hoping for some.
No guests.
I can't be hoping for some kind of non-human player character.
Those would be servants.
Okay, got me. What if I'm like some kind of radioactive waste worker, and I grew a 3rd arm?
Well, the universe is infinite, so I would have to say it's possible. Just
Okay.
not yet.
As long as
it's just
in the
not
realm of
implementable
possibility.
yet.
Okay. I'll hold you to that.
Okay.
So speaking of occupations, will different occupations have any special actions that differentiate them from other characters?
Yeah. So, really, a character's expertise is what governs the ability that character has, which is a subset of each occupation. So, for example, the archaeologist and the xenobiologist are both scientist occupations, but they have vastly different special abilities. The archaeologist is better at finding magical artifacts and searching in general, whereas the xenobiologist has had more exposure to and preparation against weird and unnatural creatures. So she's naturally more resistant to the negative effects of aberrations and beast-type monsters. She also will pass these bonuses to her allies in the same room as her. Basically, because there's 16 different characters, there's 16 unique abilities.
All right, that brings me to something I was actually thinking about. You mentioned there that this will bring bonuses to her allies, but technically some people aren't really her allies. Is there like some kind of way to differentiate who you're not treating as an ally or not?
Yeah, so each character has a cell phone, and their cell phone is their only form of communication with each other if they're not in the same room. So you'll have a mini-map, and you can see the positions of characters you're in communication with. And you actually have the option, it's not an action point, you can just toggle it on and off, whether or not you're communicating. Now, you can't choose who you're communicating with, it's either all or nothing. So if I turn my cell phone off, let's say, no one knows where my character is. I'm off the grid now, unless you're in my room with me. So if I turn my cell phone off, I'm no longer communicating with anybody, and they can't communicate with me. So I'm effectively now an enemy to everyone. If we have
If you do,
if we have communication, then yeah, we are considered allies.
okay, but if you turn off your cell phone, can you communicate with people that are in the same room as you still?
Yeah, so there's two ways to talk to another player. If you have your cell phone on, at least currently this is the way it is. If you have your cell phone on and someone else you want to talk to has their cell phone on, you can still chat to each other in game. Or whether or not you have your cell phone on, you can talk to people who are in your immediate room.
Okay, so I was just thinking, like, if you were trying to make a secret plot with somebody, how you would go about that.
It's all through Whisper. There is no actual. The only, I guess, technically global chat is if everyone is in your room. So
Okay.
you can only talk to people in your room or one person whom you have communication with.
All right, that makes sense. You mentioned servants earlier. If I die and become a servant, will my basic actions change?
Yeah, so servants are a little more specific in their functionality, but they have a ton more abilities and power. They're just generally stronger. So to start, things that a guest can normally do, a servant won't necessarily be able to do. Like, not all servants can actually hold items. Some of them are more aberrant, not even human, really, or humanoid, I should say. So they can't necessarily hold items. Some can. Which also means those servants cannot search rooms for items. However, servants are unaffected by dread effects from monsters or other servants. But they can still do things like attack and move and use abilities. They just have different abilities and a different win condition.
Okay, so servants will be how I have 3 axes in my hands.
Yes, maybe.
Sounds good. So what can players expect to encounter in the rooms as they explore other than monsters?
So each room is unique, save a handful of them. There are 6 different types of room categories: horrific, comfort, outside, storage, and utility, and common. If a room falls under a category that's just not common, it's unique, meaning that there's only one that can appear at any time. But it can reappear multiple times. So if I leave the room and it goes back into the ether, it can come back down if someone else spawns it, essentially. Common rooms are things like corridors and guest bedrooms, where there are multiple copies of them that can appear in the mansion at the same time. But even those copies are technically still unique, in the sense that what happens in one corridor won't necessarily happen in the other corridor. They don't copy the effects. They're still 2 different corridors. They're just the same name. And on top of that, some of these rooms actually have actions that you can perform only in that room, like an infirmary. It has tons of medical equipment. You can use this medical station to attempt to heal your health and sanity. So that's just one thing. Not only can you interact with some of these rooms, but most rooms will spawn what's called an event token. It'll be on the ground. You can, as an action, you can take each turn. It's called Activate Room Event. If you're in the same space as one of these event tokens and use this action, the game will choose a random event based on certain parameters, like how much health or sanity you have, or which room you activated it in, and if the room is in darkness or on fire, etc. All of these events are text-based. You'll read what's happening to your character, and most will give you a choice on how to react to that event. Your results will depend on your choice and some of the other parameters too. These events can be anywhere from catastrophically deadly to awesomely helpful to your character. And the last thing, you can expect not to be alone. Yeah, monsters can be there, or they can even appear from events, but also other players, which can either be controlling a guest or a servant if they died.
Okay, you mentioned back there that these unique rooms, that they can disappear and then reappear if they've like fully dissolved at some point. It would be a completely new instance of the room though, right? It wouldn't be the same room?
No, actually, the mansion, so the dissipation is different than this reappearance. Dissipation is essentially the scenario, the base game scenario, will start to make rooms permanently disappear. That's just the dissipation.
Okay.
Whereas the reappearing part is it's part of a concept we call room permanence and object memory. So room permanence is a simple rule. As long as a player is in a room, that room exists. When they leave that room and there's no more players in that room, it disappears and goes into the ether. And the mansion is set up in a 3x3 grid of room slots, even though there's more than 9 rooms in the actual mansion itself. So when a player moves into an empty room slot, it randomly spawns a room that isn't already on there, or if it's a common one, it's a different copy. And each of these rooms have memory. They remember everything that happened to it and that's in it. Monsters, different actions you took that can't be taken more than once, things you may have dropped, etc.